Hello, welcome to another video. I got a question from Salty Coda, and that was how do I write an outline slash a script? And I decided to focus in on the outline process, because scripting and outline are very separate. I also got a question about turning outlines into scripts, and I think I will address that in a later video. But for now, we're going to talk about outlining. I'm not a huge outliner these days, but when I was starting out, I focused really heavily on outlines. I really thought about outlines. I use them as my guiding posts for writing. That's still kind of what I do, but now it's more in my head. I think I've done it enough that the structure is very intuitive for me. But early on, before it became intuitive, it was important to write down outlines to break things down. It might be helpful for you. I think another thing that was very helpful early on was outlining stories that I'm not writing. And by that, I don't mean like stories that I don't plan to write, though that is a good idea. That is a good exercise. Another exercise is to outline stories that you already know. Outline your favorite stories, learn the different beats of a story, and break down the things that you like into an outline. It becomes a lot easier to outline if you understand it. And by doing like a study of the different stories that you like, you can learn a lot, and it really will help you, especially if you go across genres and really break things down. It can also be very helpful to look at very simple stories like children's stories and pop culture kind of stories. Like, they're going to be a lot easier to break down than something more free-flowing, artistic, whatever. But yeah, that would be my recommendation, is to, when I'm talking about the different elements of a story, is to break it down from something that you know, right? Okay, so outlining. Where do you start? At the beginning. The beginning is the easiest place to start. Basically, when it comes to outlining, you want to kind of build the bones out of it. You want the foundation to be good, and then you can start filling in the spaces in between on your outline. You can just like end up filling out more and more spaces until you have something very fleshed out. There are some people that kind of work like that, where like they start with the bone structure, and then they keep fleshing things out and out and out until they have a story that just kind of like emerges from the outline, versus others who will write the outline and then kind of write a story to follow it and like fill it in as they go, and then go back and edit a lot. There's some people that manage to skip the editing process entirely through very thorough editing of their like outline. So I guess it's still editing, but it's more happens in the outlining phase than having to rewrite things a bunch. Both are very valid approaches to story construction, though, obviously. So like I was saying, where do you start? You start at the beginning, because the beginning is going to be your foundation. You can kind of figure out everything from the beginning. So the beginning of your story is going to be a reflection of the end of your story. You figure out where you're starting and where you're ending. If you're starting with like a character who's very meek and nervous and ending with someone who is strong and powerful, like that's going to be the mirror, right? Or maybe they're meek and nervous and they end the story and they are okay with how meek they are, and they're more confident in themselves, in their nervousness. That's another way that a character arc can go. I'm basically highlighting the MACE method, or LACE method as I call it, where stories fall into generally 4 categories. There's location plots, where you start in one place, you end in another. There are answer plots, you start with a question, you end with the answer. There are character plots, as I was describing earlier. And then there are event plots, where a status quo is set up, the status quo is upended, and then it is reestablished or changed, but a new status quo is met regardless. When you are looking at your story, when you're beginning your outline, you need to find your beginning and you need to find your end point. Those are like the foundational points. It's easier to work on a story where you know the beginning and you can intuit the end from that. Those are like the biggest points in your story. They are the tent poles that will keep everything else together. The next thing you want to look at is the midpoint, because the midpoint is the transitional point in your story where things go from being reactive, character reacting to villain, character reacting to plot getting in their way, and they start becoming active. They start making decisions. The midpoint gives your main character the foundation to win at the end. It's the building blocks of the ending are set up in the midpoint, but the characters can't see them to fruition until the actual end of the story, right? Like, this is where like you discover the ancient magic that will eventually defeat the villain, but we don't really know how to use it, and it, like, we're gonna have to do some more plot before we get there. But the midpoint is pivotal. Often it can be like a huge pinch point of the story where like tensions happen, the story is turned on its head. Avo has my comic, The Books of Avo, has a very big midpoint that's very obvious if you want to break that one down if you've read it. But yeah, it is like one of the biggest pivots that the story will take. And then the other major points of your story that you're going to look to are your plot turns and your pinches. And so plot turns are kind of like the midpoint, but like mini. So they happen on either side of the midpoint. You will have plot turns, which will change things. They're big events. They're centerpiece plot points. So you have one on either side of the midpoint, and then you have pinches, and pinches are what put pressure. Pinches will like put pressure to cause plot turns, basically, that lead to these revelations. So you have a pinch that happens before the first plot turn, and then I believe it happens inverse on the other side, and it is what moves plot turn towards the eventual climax. I think the climax is considered like a pinch point. And those would be all of your major plot elements that you need to sort out with your outline. And that is like the most basic structure to the outline, but everything else break down further from there. So, like, I have quite a few videos where I discuss plot arcs, so I won't split hairs too much about it. But once you have this major structure, you want to apply it to all of the different plot arcs that you do have, and then you can start filling your plot outline with more of the connective tissue, which I realize I don't get into as much. So you need to start breaking down like what needs to be set up in order for you to move into. So let's start with the introduction, right? We have the introduction that will happen before the inciting incident or, plot turn 1. And so you need to take stock of like what needs to be addressed and understood for the inciting incident to happen, and you need to break that down so that you understand like each different point, and you need to figure out how many scenes you need to get all of this across. You want to try and make things succinct, but also not too crowded. You want the right amount of iteration. You don't want to go too hard and too boring. You want to get to the midpoint, not the midpoint. You want to get to the inciting incident at a pretty steady clip. So yeah, like you need to break all of that down. And the same goes for like every other major plot point. And when you have all of these things layered together, you're going to find that there is a lot of filler that you need, and you can start figuring out what scenes you need based on like what plot points need to happen and what setup needs to happen to really hit off each point that you want to achieve. And that's why adding more characters, more plots, each new lace plot line that you add is going to really bulk up your story a lot. And that's ignoring things like world building, which also needs to be set up and layered into things. But yeah, stuff will balloon from there. And then you have little subplots that will come in, and they need their own little arcs. Like arcs can exist within arcs. And I mean, that's kind of how all writing works, is like it's arcs within arcs within arcs within arcs. You know, once you get down to a single page is in and of itself an arc. So, and I guess when you think about it, when you're scripting, you're just outlining the different arcs of pages, right? You know, each dialogue has an arc. It's crazy. It goes all the way down. But yeah, that's how I used to outline. Now I've done it so much, it's intuitive. Like I said, you can get to a point that either like outlining becomes easy, or it's not even something you really think about. There's a lot of guiding principles that can get you through a story, regardless of if you know how the formulas go. I really don't think too hard about this stuff anymore. The one thing that definitely hasn't changed about me is I tend to think about the beginning and have a general idea of the end. Just because it is reflective of the beginning, it's kind of easy to figure out. Again, it becomes intuitive. So just work on that. And also, like I said at the very beginning, work on breaking things you like down into outlines, you know, like figure out mechanically how things work. Identify all of the major plot points. You can spend time like writing each scene down, write like what you learn, like what is achieved with each scene, and start like putting it together. Working backwards like this is so helpful. It's kind of just it's like integral to like understanding how writing works, is to start picking apart the things that you like. It's the same with art, you know, like to learn how to do something you like, you have to be able to figure out how it was made and how you can recreate that. Yeah, so that is that. Tomorrow or another day, I'll talk about actually moving into scripting, because I have some thoughts on that. Otherwise, thank you for listening, and leave any questions you have down below about anything to do with writing, and I will answer them in due time. Thank you. All right, goodbye.